Right, I'm going to do a little bit of a talk on Blazor server-side. Blazor is a fairly new technology from Microsoft, and the idea is that it kind of replaces your sort of JavaScript framework for your UI for web apps. So if you take a typical web app, you'll have your server backend, API, however that's distributed or anything, but basically you've got your server side and you've got your JavaScript framework on the front end. So the green box indicates where you're running on the server and the red box where you're running on the client. You've got Blazor, two versions of Blazor. You've got client side and you've got server side. I'm specifically going to talk about server side. Blazor client side isn't massively different to using other frameworks for your front end. The main difference with client side is that you've got your back end still on your server, and then you can have shared models. So you can share your models between your front end and your back end. They're your model definitions more than anything. And then on the front end, you've got your C#, which compiles to WASM on the front end, which can also use that shared project with the same models. And then you've got Blazor server side. And this is a bit different because what you've actually got is the server backend running on the server, but you've also got a C# front end running on the server as well. And then all that's really happening in your browser is a Signal-R connection to keep those together. So in a typical app, you might have your database, you've got models, you might talk to external services, you've got your validation, you've got logic, you've got your code, any IP and things, and you're obviously your UI and your DOM. Now, on Blazor server side, all that sits on the server, and it's all running on the server. So how does the client interact with that? Well, you've got a bridge between the DOM that runs on the browser and a version of the DOM that's running on the server. So the server is actually keeping that together and then keeping those in sync. And then your user only really interacts with the DOM that's running on the browser. So anything they're doing, they're just sending messages backwards and forwards to the server, and the server's kind of keeping that same copy of the DOM running, and then that's interacting with everything else. So for us, we find this quite useful because it takes away quite a lot of complexity. If you want to do, we have a lot of talks here about quite big systems. I mean, Kev was talking about sharding data and things like that. For every system like that, there are hundreds of small systems running in small companies or with much smaller amounts of data. And what Blazor server side allows you to do is, if you've come from sort of more of a Windows desktop programming environment, it's quite a good transition to Blazor because you can work in a similar sort of ways, and your program is really self-contained within your Blazor project running on the server. So you haven't quite got the same interactions and security issues that you've got with web applications and APIs and things. Right, so I'm going to do a little demo. I'm going to do it all in code. And I've got an example, and it's a set of boxes. So we've just got this app. It's got, I think there's 10 boxes on there. And we're going to interact with these boxes in the UI. So boxes, simple 2D boxes. So they've got height, width, color, and an ID. I've got a box service, which allows me to get all the boxes and get a box by its ID. And then in the UI, I'm going to put a list of boxes on the screen, and we're going to do an editing screen, which has simple buttons on it to edit it, and also an advanced one where you've got actual fields where you can edit them as well. Not worried about adding more boxes, deleting them, any sort of validation or anything like that. That's not the purpose of this example. And just to be clear, these are to show the concept of what Blazor server-side does, and is not intended as a best practice, as you will see from my last demo as well. Okay, so find the close. Right, so I have this is my service, and I've got a list of boxes in there, and you'll see I just generate some random boxes. So I'm going to create a model, so class, which I'm going to call box, And in my box, I do have some code. I was going to do this, type it, but I think I haven't quite got enough time, so we'll just cut and paste. Inside my box, I've got an ID, color, height, width. Nice and straightforward. So I can go to my navigation menus. This is a straightforward Blazor server-side app, just from a new template. And I'm going to bring in a button there that opens my boxes page. And I'm going to create my boxes page now. So Blazor component, create a page called boxes. Oops, boxes. And in my boxes, I'm going to just chuck a bit of code in there. So we've got our routing, it's our boxes page. We've got the service and things that I need to use. A bit of code at the bottom. Just drop that in there. So I've got an IEnumerable set of boxes, and as the page opens, I'm just going to go to my service, get all the boxes. And the edit box I'm going to use in a minute for navigation. And then in there, I'm going to take that and drop that in. I think we should just get it all on the screen. So what I'm going to say is if I've got some boxes, create a table. I've got 4 columns in it, so the headers, and I'm just going to run through each of my boxes, and I'm going to print them on the screen. So I'm going to run that. Give it half a second to compile. When you're ready. Okay, and I have my boxes, and I get a list of boxes. All nice and straightforward. So I'm going to go back to my screen now, and I'm going to put in an edit for that. So let's just put another column in there, and I've got somewhere I've got an edit button. So let's just drop an edit button in there. And the edit button, very straightforward, it's just a button. When I click it, I want it to go to the edit box, and I'm going to pass the box that I'm actually showing at the moment to that. And that calls this code down here, which just changes, which navigates to my page called edit box and passes the box ID. So let's create an edit box page. And my edit box, if I just take that lot. So my edit box, ignore the add box, that was my initial ID. Edit box, it passes an ID in, and it's going to pick that ID up. And if I go to my code, let's get some code in there, and I can drop that in there. So in my edit box, I've got an ID, and that will be mapped in from the routing. And as my page loads, I want to go to my box service and get the box that I've passed in. And finally, I'm going to just put a bit of a rendering in there. So we'll do that, drop that in there. And we'll also on that line, let's say, and we'll put the ID in there as well. Okay, so what I've got on my edit screen is I've got 4 buttons. One to make it taller, one to make it shorter, one to make it thinner, one to make it wider. So what I'm going to do on the click is I'm just going to change the height of the box. Just add 50 to it, subtract 50 to it, and so on. And underneath that is I'm going to go and get some colors from my box service colors. The colors is just an array of colors. And for each one, I'm going to create a button. And when you click on the button, so on click again, I'm just going to set the box color to the color. So if I run that, let's do that. And hopefully on my box screen, I've got an edit button. Yep, I've got an edit button. And I can make my boxes wider, and I can change the color of them as so. I can also make them shorter, but I can sort of make them negative numbers, which isn't very good. Okay. So what can I do about that? Well, I could put a load of validation in and things like this, but the whole point of what I was saying about server-side is that you're not constrained in the same way. This box is the same box that's in my service that's on my UI, and so on. So I can actually go to the box model itself, and I'll just drop some code on there. So if I go from there to there, let's take those two properties out, and let's put a couple of backing variables in, and then I'm going to put the properties there, and I'm going to constrain the value. So I've just got a little constrain function there, which constrains it between 50 and 500. If I run this, wait for it to run. So I've got the same thing now, but as I go shorter, I'm constrained by the by that limitation. So the thing here, which again is key for why I like Blazor, there's no way of getting another value in there. That value doesn't exist on the UI. You can't force it in. You can't force it into an API or anything. You can't hack it. It only exists on the server. So it's just the same object everywhere, and the only things that come across the UI are what you present to the UI. So let's do it a bit different. Let's put some input fields in, and then we potentially got the option of changing those. So if I go back to my edit screen, and I've got some code here, just a bit of code. So I'll just take that. So what I've got is I've got a little advanced button, so you can switch between the button mode and the advanced mode. And there's a pass function there simply because the text boxes I'm going to put in are strings, and I just want to pass them to integers. So if I now go to my code here, and let's put in my advanced button, and what I'm going to do now is wrap that up as well. To there. And that's where we want. Is that right? Yeah, that's right. And I'm also going to put that button in there so I can switch between advanced and not advanced. Okay. So all I've done here is I've said if the setting is on advanced, I'm going to render this bit rather than the other bit. And on this bit, we've got a button to switch it back to standard mode, and we've got 3 input fields. And again, if you change something, we're just passing the value. Remember, this isn't a variable in JavaScript. This is just sending the event to the Blazor backend. So when that item comes in, we're going to set the box height to whatever we pass from this value. Okay, so let's do that. And that's ready. And you'll see now, as we edit that, we can use our standard editing or we can use our advanced editing. So, I can put a number in there and it will constrain it again. I can't force anything, even though I've now got a box, I can't force anything other than any other value into that variable because that variable doesn't exist in the browser. So just moving on from there, just to show you, because it's quite straightforward to do, let's create a component. Let's create a visual box. And in my visual box, let's, if I've got visual, I think that's my visual box, yeah. Let's drop that in there. So now I've got created a component, and it takes a box. The same box that's on our server, same box that we're having on our edit screen. And all it does is I've got a class there just to put a border around it and things. And I'm going to set the height to the box height and the box width and the box color. And then on my edit screen, I'm going to, just after that code there, I'm going to put in my visual box. And I'm going to set the box variable to my box. Oops. And we'll run that again. And I go into my boxes and I'll edit that, and now I've got a box that I can change as so. And again, no calls to an API, no getting any updates or anything like that. It's just taking care of itself. This is, again, all running on the server. This isn't running in the browser at all. And then finally, let's go one step further forward. So let's go back to my original list, and let's put the box on the list as well, just because we can. And we'll put our visual box on there, and we'll get a box, and we'll run that. Off it goes. Sorry for the wait for compiles. It's not the fastest laptop in the world. And we've got our series of boxes. Okay, that's right. Bit horrible that, bit big. So we'll just drop in and we'll put a parameter in our visual box. Let's put a small parameter in there, and we'll put a size parameter in a size function in there, which just makes it 10 times smaller. And just do that and pop that on there. As so, and then I can go back to my box screen, and I can drop small in there, run it again. And we get a list of boxes with little pictures beside them. So nice and easy reuse of the components. Okay, the last thing I'm going to show you, just to re-emphasize this, and this is the real disclaimer of this is not good practice. I'm going to create a user screen. So let's do is it user? I think it was user. Is it user or users? Users. I'll just create another one. Users. Right. And I'm just going to get some code for my user screen. And my user screen's got a box on it with a username and inputs a username. And then after you type a username, we go to our user change, and our user change gets the value of that string, and it passes it to our user service and gets the password for that user, and brings it back to the UI in plain text. I'm then going to take that password, and I'm going to show the first character of it, and I'm going to put the length on the screen as well. And let's just run that. And it goes. And we go to our users. And it pulls our password down, and it can put that on the screen. Now, I appreciate that's not something you're likely to do. But the key take home on this is, if I do this again, let's just go back onto that screen. I've just set a breakpoint. And that's hit my breakpoint. So that's got my password on my UI. But that UI is still hidden in the server with no link to that, no link to the user. The user can't interact with that password, even though we've brought it right into our UI code. And I appreciate that's a very extreme example of it. But it's, we find it very useful for validation and things like that, and the safety that you get from that when you want to build something quite quickly. That's everything. Any questions? Yes.
Yeah, so you're saying that that passwords in the UI would not. So,
Yeah.
Sorry, I was a little confused. If I Control Shift I or what's happening, what am I going to see? From a client side, if I
Nothing. Let me let it go. Let me let it continue through. Nothing really. There's nothing there. It's only bringing across to the client what you put in. So if you wrap something up with a if display equals none, or well, not display, but not, I don't mean the CSS display, but some form of display none or display not allowed, and you wrap that piece of code, piece of UI in that, it will never get rendered. It will never be in code that's running on the UI at all. Now, if you run this on the client side, you've just exposed your password. Don't get me wrong. So if you run Blazor, the WASM version of Blazor, because all your code's coming to the coming down to the browser, and then and obviously it can be decompiled or whatever. But what we're doing here is all of that is running inside the server, and all you're getting going backwards and forwards to the client is what the server says that we're going to display or not display. It's okay? Right. Thank you.